Welcome to the deep dive. We're going straight into an analysis today of a really challenging ethical question. When someone you care about is in pain, what is the right thing to say? Or maybe, and this is key, what's the right thing not to say? We all kind of instinctively want to rush in, don't we? With advice, solutions, maybe some quick spiritual comfort because, well, we feel like we should fix it. But what if that urge, the one born of really good intentions, what if it's fundamentally flawed? What if the most ethical thing, the best thing for the person suffering, is actually just to be quiet? So we're diving deep into a truly foundational source today, the biblical story of Job and his three friends. We're specifically looking at Job chapters 20 and 21. Our mission here is to pull out some key insights about human connection, about listening, and maybe understand why offering silent, genuine presence often takes way more wisdom, more humility, than just spouting what we think is superior advice.
And that exact point, that idea of silence, that's right where Job begins his appeal. It's so striking because it just completely flips our normal script, what we expect comfort to be. In Job 21, verse 2, he doesn't ask for a fix or some kind of formula. He demands something quite different. He says, listen closely to my words, let that be your comfort. So he's telling his friends pretty directly, look, if you really want to help me, your encouragement, your comfort, it should come from actually paying attention to my reality, not from your prepared speeches. He's saying their silence, their willingness to just sit with him, to absorb his suffering, that would actually be a greater gift than all their, philosophical arguments. It's quite a shocking rejection, isn't it, of the usual comfort talk, because it really zeroes in on where people trying to help often mess up. They think they know the answer before they even truly heard the person's pain, their question.
Right. So the source material is basically saying Job is literally begging his friends to just stop talking. And, while Job's story gives us this incredibly high-stakes emotional background, the source we're looking at also brings in a bit of classical philosophy to kind of back this up. It mentions the Greek philosopher Zeno, who apparently said something like, well, we have two ears but only one mouth, so that ratio itself suggests we ought to listen twice as much as we speak. Simple but profound, but in Job's case, the stakes are just absolute, aren't they? He makes this really crucial point that his complaint isn't even really aimed at his friends or people in general. It's aimed at God. Because his suffering, it wasn't caused by people, and no amount of human advice could possibly fix it.
And that is the core insight into why the friends failed so badly. They treated his situation like, some kind of solvable math problem. Okay, Job is suffering, so the formula must be he sinned somewhere.
Right.
They were just applying these generic spiritual rules without really pausing to consider the sheer, unique, overwhelming nature of what he was actually going through. Job was, as the source notes, extremely agitated. These weren't small things he was grappling with. It was life and death stuff. His very soul was on the line. He actually tells his friends, look at me, be astonished and cover your mouths with your hands. He's basically saying, just look at this devastation in front of you and realize your neat little intellectual answers are completely useless here.
Yeah.
And the source rightly points out, if his friends were the ones going through this kind of desperate cosmic suffering, their whole perspective would likely shatter. They wouldn't be talking from such a, comfortable, safe distance.
Yeah, I think it really hits on the tension most of us feel, right? When we're around someone in serious distress, we feel this enormous pressure to, fill the silence. Silence is awkward. It feels like we're not doing anything helpful. So, is it really fair to expect people to just stand there and listen when their own discomfort is screaming at them to offer something, anything?
Oh, it's incredibly difficult. Absolutely. And it requires real self-mastery, doesn't it? But the failure of Job's friends, it wasn't that their intentions were bad. It was their failure to grasp the difference between what they needed for comfort and what Job actually needed. They were, in a way, offering these intellectual formulas to soothe their own anxiety about suffering. And that's why their words felt so hollow, so inadequate to Job. They were speaking from safety. Which brings us really neatly to the core distinction that the source material hammers home.
Okay, yeah, this feels like the critical moment. The source gives us this really powerful, immediate way to tell apart two very different ways we try to show concern. It's kind of the difference between just trying to help and actually maybe making things a bit better.
Exactly. We absolutely have to draw a clear line between sympathy and empathy. We tend to use them interchangeably, right? But ethically, functionally, the source material sees them as almost polar opposites. So sympathy, as it's described here, it's presented as a kind of superior stance. It's that I help you dynamic. And often, maybe even unintentionally, it carries this sense of superiority. You see the person in pain, you observe them, and you offer help from your position of well, strength or security. You're essentially looking down on the person who needs help.
And what does that feel like? If I'm the one receiving that sympathy, I guess I feel pitied or maybe indebted, like I owe something now. It feels conditional.
Precisely. Now, contrast that with empathy. Empathy, on the other hand, is described as taking a lower, an integrating position. It actually requires you to genuinely try to meld into the other person's way of thinking, their perspective. You're meeting them right where they are. Imagine sympathy is like standing across the street, watching someone stuck in deep mud and shouting, "Oh, I feel so bad for you. Maybe you should try walking over here where it's dry."
Right. And empathy is actually stepping into the mud with them. Maybe not having a solution, but just being there in it.
That's the heart of the difference. Though the words sound alike, the ethical result, the emotional impact, it's completely different. Sympathy might look like compassion on the surface, but it often fails to truly grasp the world from a suffering person's point of view. Empathy, well, that requires vulnerability. It requires suspending your own judgment, your own answers, for a while.
That really reframes it, doesn't it? Makes the shift from sympathy to empathy sound less like just a nice-to-have communication skill and more like, well, an ethical imperative, especially for anyone who's in a position of leadership or teaching or caregiving, which, let's be honest, covers almost everyone listening at some point in their lives. So the danger then is that we kind of reflexively fall back on what the source calls the teacher's angle. We start dishing out superior authoritative guidance, and the source has a term for this pattern, lawgivism. It's where even sound logic, if it's delivered from that place of superiority, just lacks genuine love, genuine connection.
And that is such a pervasive, common failing. It really is. Think about Job's friends again. They were older, maybe they genuinely had deeper spiritual knowledge, more life experience, yet Job's suffering, it just completely blew past the limits of their rational thought, their neat categories, their experiential logic. They were operating purely on, established knowledge, not on integrated reality. And when knowledge or instruction is deployed without that essential prerequisite of integrated empathy, the result is often what the source calls accusatory sympathy. It sounds complex, but it's simple. You're sympathetic, yes, to the fact they're hurting. But, subtly or not so subtly, you use your knowledge to imply, or maybe even state outright, that they're suffering because they broke some rule, some policy, some spiritual law. They messed up.
Oof. That immediately just lands like salt on a wound, as the source says. And I see that happening all the time, even outside religious contexts. Like a manager who rigidly applies some company policy to an employee who's clearly distressed without even trying to understand the human cost, just because, well, it's the rule. Or maybe a parent who enforces some house standard really strictly without seeing the underlying pain that might be driving their kid's behavior. Those feel like perfect examples of applying lawgivism instead of seeking empathy first.
Exactly right. In those moments, good intentions can lead to really devastatingly negative results. The person suffering often feels, well, emotionally blackmailed, maybe, or just that their very real pain is being dismissed by a rule book. We constantly have to check our motivation, don't we? Are we offering advice because we genuinely want to help them? Or honestly, are we doing it because we want to relieve our own discomfort with their messy situation by providing a tidy solution, sort of asserting control? The latter puts us squarely into that lawgivism trap.
Okay, so if superior advice, if lawgivism fails, what's the alternative? The source does give us a really powerful countermodel, right? A shift from that conditional law-based advice towards something like radical grace.
Yes, and this model of grace, it fundamentally redefines the whole relationship. The source uses the example of Jesus here. Although he was a rabbi, thoroughly familiar with the law, his approach to people who were vulnerable, people seen as sinners, was primarily one of grace. He worked to clarify the true, loving intent behind God's heart, moving way beyond the sort of rigid, transactional nature of an eye for an eye. The point wasn't just demanding conformity to external rules, but recognizing the inherent worth of the person, even maybe especially in their failure or pain. This shift is really from high-level direction giving, do this, don't do that, to low-level accompaniment, just walking alongside. It changes the goal entirely. It's no longer about controlling the other person, making them conform to our idea of the right path. It's simply about accompanying them through their path wherever it leads.
That sounds beautiful, really powerful in theory. But what does that accompaniment actually look like in practice? What were the concrete actions, the examples of empathetic grace cited in the source that really embody this shift?
Yeah, the examples are powerful precisely because they demand real effort and sacrifice from the giver, not just words. They highlight actions that are, frankly, physically or emotionally costly. First, there's the idea of being willing to walk the second mile. Now, in its original context, this meant going way beyond what was legally required or expected by duty. It signifies a physical commitment, giving up your own time, your own comfort, to shoulder some of the other person's burden without expecting anything back. It shifts the focus from, say, efficiency to endurance.
Huh. So it's kind of the opposite of efficiency. It's about choosing to be inefficient in a way for the sake of the other person.
Absolutely, that's a great way to put it. Second, forgiving those who sin against you and even praying for them. Now, this requires extreme selflessness, doesn't it? Because it means engaging positively with someone who has actually hurt you, denying that natural instinct for payback or feeling superior. It demands real humility and maybe recognizing our own imperfections too. And third, the source mentions acting kindly, not just with the left hand, but with the right hand as well. This kind of emphasizes completeness, intentionality, and our compassion. It means our actions should be holistic. They should be genuine through and through, not just, token gestures we do to tick a box or fulfill some obligation. These actions, they move beyond that conditional comfort. They stop demanding that the person conform to our expectations and instead simply commit to presence. You shift the message from you need to do this to get better to simply I am genuinely with you in this, regardless of the outcome.
Wow. Okay, so this whole deep dive really informed by Job's devastating simple demand. It seems to show that often what people truly need from us isn't judgment, it isn't quick fix solutions or our superior guidance, it's just presence.
Yeah.
The real needs, summarized from the source material, they seem straightforward on paper, but may be incredibly difficult to actually deliver. Companionship, a willingness to just share their solitude, their loneliness, and authentic concern, the kind of concern that maybe requires us to actually study the situation, pray about it, reflect deeply on it, rather than just relying on our first spontaneous, possibly self-serving advice. We need to somehow open ourselves up to hearing their internal sorrow, their pain, and be willing to genuinely accompany them through it, even and maybe especially when we have no answers ourselves.
And this really does raise a critical question, I think, for all of us living and working in a complex world where, let's face it, quick fixes are always valued, right? How often in our professional lives, maybe in our families or within our friendships, do we unconsciously mistake the relative ease of providing that superior sympathy, the advice we feel comfortable giving, for the profound difficulty and the necessary effort of practicing true integrated empathy? Because that integrated empathy, it requires us to give up control, doesn't it? And that can be terrifying. So maybe here's a final thought for you, for everyone listening, to kind of carry forward. The next time you find yourself facing someone in crisis, instead of immediately jumping to formulate your perfect piece of advice, maybe try asking yourself first, if Job were here, what would his demand be? And can I honor that demand? Can I offer genuine, non-controlling presence, maybe even just silence right now?